Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new book review today, and today I leave my classics aside and my literary novels and I go back to Taleb. Nassim Nicholas Taleb is author of a series of books called Incerto, and the book that I'll be reviewing today, which is Antifragile, is the fourth in the series. Now, I have not read these books in order. If you are someone who likes to read books in order, then I would suggest that you read Fooled by Randomness first. This one, where he talks about the hidden role of chance in life and in the markets. This was his very first book, and as you can see, the spine isn't cracked on this one. It is the only book which I haven't read as yet. The second book that follows on from that is The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable, and I did a full book review of this book on my channel somewhere. I'm not going to link it simply because of, well, two reasons. The first one, I haven't figured out how to link videos in YouTube, which I should get up off my lazy ass and do so. But the second one is, well, don't care. If you really need to, you'll Google it and you'll be able to find it. The third one is The Bed of Procrustes, which is the philosophical and practical aphorisms. I've definitely done a review of this book, another really good book. The fourth one, as I mentioned, is a book that I'll be reviewing, Anti-Fragile, which is the things that gain from disorder. And then finally, his last book, The Skin in the Game, which is the book that introduced me to Taleb's writing. Nearby there's this publishing house, and they had opened up their warehouse some years ago, and I decided to go with the hordes of crowds waiting outside. As soon as the doors opened, they screamed inside and all ran for the cookbooks. So the crowd went that way, and I don't usually follow what the crowd does, so I found some boxes that had a lot of non-fiction books, and I recognized the name of Taleb, and I bought this for a heavily discounted price. I think I was actually very lucky in finding it because it introduced me to his writing and introduced me to the way he writes, which is brilliant. He was a trader. The way he just writes is brilliant because he incorporates not only probability, graphs, statistics, evidence, research, but he's also a practitioner. He's been in there in the markets. This is his stuff. This is his bread and butter, and he puts his money where his mouth is. So he has skin in the game when it comes to the work because he actually follows his own thoughts and what he shares. But the way he writes is actually quite wry, quite comical, quite humorous. And when I finished reading this book, I remember calling up my father and over the phone said, "Dad, you have got to read this guy's books." And I said it in Greek because I am of Greek background, and I remember saying to my father that Taleb wrote in such a way that was like our dinner table conversations and all the things that we had discussed over the years about the unfairness of certain systems and the unfairness of universities, the unfairness of the stuff that I'd gone through in my own corporate career that I couldn't kind of explain, but I felt in here that something was not quite right, that I was working within a system that wasn't somehow serving me or serving the few that I simply didn't know how to express myself, how to articulate the unfairness of the systems that I was in, simply because I did feel that I was out of place. I felt at times that I thought differently to other people. So that introduced me to his works, and since then I'd read the books, I've done the reviews, but this one I decided to read after I finished reading Pride and Prejudice. No reason, anyway, things you do. And I thought to myself, I need to get back into the non-fiction realm, and given that I hadn't read Taleb's couple of books, I thought, right, I'll pick up Anti-Fragile and see what this book is about. Anti-Fragility, it's a very good concept. I hadn't thought about it before because I, like my husband, when I mentioned it to him while he was watching the footy, because that's what I do. I just throw out big philosophical questions to him when he's watching his team play because that's how I roll. I said to him, "Hun, what do you think anti-fragility is?" while his team was trying to make us scoring like the ball through the goals. I don't know sport. Anyway, so he turns to me angry. But he goes, that's resilience. But it's not really resilience. And I had the good thought not to argue with him while the footy was on. So anti-fragility, if you think about it on a spectrum, which is the way that Taleb explains it, on the one hand, on the one side, you've got fragility. So it provides the example of a coffee cup. Now, if a coffee cup is subjected to stresses, knocks, impacts, it's going to break. So that's fragile. On the other side of the spectrum is anti-fragility. And anti-fragility is when you are impacted by stresses, risks, uncertainty, but that you come out of it stronger than what you came into it. So there are potential gains out of seeking risk, uncertainty, mistakes, all these things, that you become better and stronger. He said that there is no such word for it in the English language, which is quite surprising. I thought to myself, I wonder if there's a word in the Greek language. Well, I'm talking ancient Greek, not modern Greek. And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't know. But I'm sure that Taleb would have known that because he would have written it down. He's such a widely read person. And one of the things I do like when reading his books and many other books is I always look at the back and look at the glossary, the appendix, and the additional notes. And his bibliography, I went through it. It's so in-depth. I think a lot has got to be said about the bibliography, that if you sit down and actually read some of the references that he talks about, that you can basically, this is self-education in some way. So I really like that he's also got a very, very in-depth bibliography, if that is your thing, or if you want, I guess, more details into the stuff that he writes, because sometimes he does write quite technically with a lot of statistics, a lot of graphs and things, but in this book you'll find that that's not the case. In the other books it's more of that, but in Antifragile it's not. Thinking about the concept of anti-fragility, where risks, lessons, mistakes, stresses impact us, that we become stronger. In actual fact, we survive. And he talks about nature being the outcome of all things that have survived, that they've had a longer period of time because they've had different stresses placed on them, environmental stresses or whatever it is, and they are still around, and that we should trust those more than the things that seem to be much more fragile. But then he also talks about this idea that we reward and we acknowledge the scientists and the researchers and those academics who seem to think a lot more and put papers together, and yet we don't advantage or help or reward, acknowledge the tinkerers, the doers, the ones who are doing the do as opposed to not walking their talk, if that makes sense. A lot of the stuff that he writes about is all about kind of sitting back and looking at the picture ahead of us and seeing who's got that skin in the game, who walks the talk, who learns from their mistakes, who actively seeks out errors and mistakes and failures and then learns from them. Because in the majority of our situations, when we look at companies, if we look at enterprises, mistakes are bad. Mistakes will set you behind. Mistakes will make you lose your work or make you lose your job. He does encourage us to radically rethink about this concept of success, and success as being the people who do things differently. He encourages us to think of the entrepreneurs as the people who give us the source of our anti-fragility. They're the ones who tinker, they're the ones who experiment, who take the blame at times, and who also are the ones that have got the skin in the game. Big lessons. I'm not going to talk about the detail of this book. The book is split up into different books, and he talks about options, he talks about asymmetry, he talked of success and what success means to different people. He talks about linearity and non-linearity. Overall, what he's doing is that he's encouraging us to look at ways to be anti-fragile. And anti-fragile means seeking out and being comfortable with uncertainty. and using that uncertainty and using those risks that might happen to take risks and to do things a bit differently, to learn widely, to learn beyond our domain of expertise, to question, to seek out understanding, to not take things that are given to us at face value, to live, and if this is a quote, an intelligent life which is all about emotional positioning to eliminate the pain of strong shocks. That if you're anti-fragile, you're going to get some gain out of shocks. Now, when I read this book, it reminded me of another book that I read some years back, which is also a fantastic one that you might want to check out, and that's The Neo-Generalist by Kenneth Mickelson and Richard Martin, who also talk about the benefit of becoming just more generalist as opposed to being a specialist, hyper specialist in your field, to the point that you don't know anything or can consider things outside of your domain. Because if you do that, then any particular shock in your domain will actually affect it. And so that means hyper specialism is fragile. Overall, if you're thinking about reading this book and you want to read it in order, by all means do it, because it'll put the context of black swans, these highly improbable events that are happening more and more in our life. And in Anti-Fragile, he pulls it together as to what we can do to not overcome the black swans, because we know that they're going to be in our life, but to at least become stronger from them and be able to know what we need to do and how to do it. He encourages us to think beyond the episteme, to think beyond the book knowledge, and to become and to have a technique, to have a craft, to have a skill, to ask questions, to read widely. And there's a big chapter dedicated to self-education and learning in this, which was the area that I put in a lot of post-it notes. I must admit that when I was reading this book, I like to read everywhere, and I'm the type of person who takes a book with me everywhere I go. I was in a cafe and I was reading this book and marking the notes, and someone had seen me reading in the cafe, and he came by and he mentioned to me that, oh, you're someone who's going to do a review. That looks like you're going to do a review on that book. And I must admit, it was quite nice to have a random stranger just come up out of the blue and start a conversation with me on a book that I was reading, and I was able to talk to him about it. And it was just really interesting to do something a little bit different that created a random event at a time where we're not having these random events happen in our life sometimes, especially when we're just on that bloody phone. So I think the things that I would recall out of this book is the concept of anti-fragility, the concept that Taleb had put into writing the things that I had been feeling disconnected with in my own corporate career, and in the jobs that I had been having, and in the systems that I'd been working for in the corporate world and with public service as well. And also understanding that I did have opportunities to work with different organizations such as the military, and also a B corporation which I loved, which was owner operated, and which ticked all the boxes for me with regards to the types of organizations I wanted to work for and the types that I felt most comfortable with, aligned with the values that I was seeing. And this is something that he also talks about in the last book in this book, about this how organizations are structured and who to trust and who not to trust as well. So really interesting book that will make me think long and hard. When I do think in the future about it, I'll think about those instances of aligning it to my own life and aligning it to the conversations that I've had with random strangers in cafes about this book. Let me know what you think about the books that you have read by Taleb. How have they changed your life? How have they changed your thinking? What have you done differently in your work or your life in order to kind of come to terms with understanding about the systems that we're already working in and having to work under and in? and what you're seeing happening in your own profession with regards to the bureaucrats versus all the entrepreneurs out there doing the do versus those who are not walking their talk. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye bye.